about to see how Philippine literature rises in 1981 to 1985 and how our Filipino artists become prominent in this period. After 10 years of military rule and some changes in the life of the Filipinos, which started in the new society, martial rule was at last lifted in January 2, 1981.
And so, as I have said, I sign in your presence proclaiming the termination of the state of martial law throughout the Philippines. I say, we have just begun.
To those in government, the lifting of military rule heralded a change. To their perceptions, the Philippines become a new nation, and this former President Marcos called the new Republic of the Philippines. Litfam, a historian, called this the Third Republic. The First Republic, he claimed, was during the Philippine Republic of Emilio Aguinaldo when we first got our independence from Spaniards on June 12, 1898. The second was when the Americans granted us our independence on July 4, 1946. This period, January to 1981, was the Third Republic when we were freed from military rule. During this period, it cannot be denied that many people seated with rebellion and protest because of the continued oppression and suppression. This was further aggravated when former Senator Benigno S. Aquino Jr., the idol of the Filipino masses, whom they hoped to be the next president, was brutally murdered on August 21, 1983. This stage of the nation had its effect on our literature. After the Aquino assassination, the people's voices could no longer be contained. Both the public and private sectors in government were chanting and shouting. Women, men, and the youth became bolder and their voices were raised indecent. And Litfam, this is our first episode of our Facts Check. Fact check number 1. Litfam. Here is the twist. The Palanca Awards. The Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature, which was launched in 1950, continued its recognition of the best of the literary fields like poetry, short stories, essays, 1 and 3 act plays. In 1981, the winners were the following. In Hug Heaven by Jesse Garcia got the first prize. Jesse B. Garcia's In Hug Heaven is a peek into people's crushing poverty in 1970s Quiapo. The character's dismal existence is ironically bathed with cheery neon lights, cruelly highlighting their misery and delightfully taunting them. At the time I'm talking about, the building was just awaiting the wrecker's ball, and in a sense, it had already arrived. But still, the building stood there for quite some time, in all its tarnished decrepitude, ghostly and rot-infested, dwarfing the posh though squat 1 and 2-story establishments
nearby. From the rooftop located just a few GD meters above my window, and which once served as promenade for drunks and cheap ladies of the night, one could catch a grand vista of corrugated iron roofs and electrical wirings, television antennas and clotheslines all tangled up in a frenzied fishworm snarls and looking like witches' broomsticks going this way and that way against a smog yellow sky. The building was hemmed in form behind a tenement structure, a story taller than itself and equally just as dilapidated, so it had long been converted into a warehouse, all its windows shut up and borders except for the one directly overlooking mine, which was occupied by the caretaker of the place, a big burly policeman, and his pretty frail looking wife who gave out moaning bird like coos when he made love to her every night.
The second prize was got by Luning Bonifacius Eras in her The Party Hopper. And the third one is In These Hallowed Walls by Jesus Cruz.
In 1982, those who won were Heart Island by Jose Dalisay Jr., Paz de Dux by Azucena Grajo Oranza, and The Sky is Always Blue by Joe Marl A. Abueg.
Litfam, did you know that in 1983, the mood was restive? The nation was angry after the murder of the opposition leader, Benigno Aquino. But the award ceremonies continued after the delay. The winners were
Jose Y. Dalisay Jr. in his old-timer, Jesus O. Cruz in his games, Perfect Sunday by Jose Y. Ayala. First prize in poetry, Filipino, Jose F. Lacaba. First prize English essay, Gregorio Brillantes. Second prize English essay, Adrian Cristobal. In 1984, the winners were The Reprieve by Susan S. Lara, first prize. Second prize, The Tangerine Gumamela by Sylvia Mendez Ventura. Third prize co-winner, The Little Wars of Philemon Saire by Limuel Torrevillas. And the third prize, Stranger in an Asian City by Gregorio Brillantes.
In 1985, the winners were The Hand of God by Conrado Quiros, first place. A Nobel Prize for George by Ellie Ang Barroso, and The Me of the East by Charles Loom rank also first and third in 1985. Litfam. In 1984, the Palanca Awards start choosing the best in novel writing. And this contest, which was held every 3 years, gives time for local writers to write a more beautiful and quality works. And also, we have our first 3 winners for the Palanca Awards for poetry.
In 1981 to 1982, we have Monologues or Otherwise 1 and 2 by Pablo Liwanag, Outsider and Other Poems by Cesar Felipe Bacani Jr., Mas Bate by Simeon Dumdum Jr., Tight Wire and Other Poems by Alfredo A. Yuson, Pax Panda and Other Poems by Edgardo Maranan, and Dolphins, Dinosaurs, and Eagles by Augusta de Elimeda. In 1982 to 1983, we have The Other Clearing by Dr. Gemino H. Abad, Series and Voyager, Rowena Tordesillas, Thin Poems Occasioned by Big and Small Events by Alfredo Navarro Salanga, The Chameleon by Cesar C. Hirco, Action by Simeon Dumdum Jr., and The Time Factor by Ofelia A. Di Malanta. In 1984, we have Configuring the Gods and Other Poems, Voyage Poems, Waiting for Lobregat, Gossamer, Port of Entry, February 1899, Song of the Free Continents, Moving with the Wind. In 1985, we have Dream of Knives by Alfredo Yuson, Miscellanea 1984 to 1985 by Alfredo Navarro Salanga, Aravos Prek by Are Gamalinda, Finders of the Image by Mariano Quillantes, Confabulations by Felix Fojas, In the South Country, The Gift Supreme, and Voyage in Dry Season.
Number 2. Lit Fam. Did you know that the Filipino poetry during this time is romantic and revolutionary?
Writers wrote openly of their criticism against the government. The supplication of the people were couched in fiery, colorful, violent, profane, and insulting language.
For our fact check number 3. Many Filipino songs this time dealt with the themes that were really true to life, like grief, poverty, aspiration for freedom, love of God, of country, and of fellow men.
Many composers grieved over Ninoy Aquino's Traqueus assassination, composed songs. Among them were Corita, Eric, and Freddie Aguilar. Corita and Eric composed a song titled Laban ng Bayan Ko, and this was first sung by Corita during the National Unification Conference of the Opposition in March 1985. This was also sung during the presidential campaign movement for Cory Aquino to inspire the movement against Marcos in February 1986. Freddie Aguilar revived the song Bayan Ko, which was written by Jose Corazon de Jesus and C. de Guzman during the American period.
Ibon ng may layang lumipad, kulungin mo at umiiyak. Bayan pa kayang sakdal dilag, ang dimag nasang makaalpas. Pilipinas kung minumutya, pugad ng luha't dalita, aking adikha, makita kang sakdalaya.
And here is our fourth fact check. The yearly festival for the Filipino films continued to be held during this period.
The people's love for sex films also was unabated. Many producers took advantage of this at the expense of public morality.
And for our fifth fact check, the English poetry during the Third Republic. During the wake of Benigno S. Aquino Jr.'s incident, people reacted with shock, appalled with suddenness and unexpected events. Alfredo Navarro Salanga, a consistent writer in the Philippine Paranormal magazine, in his column, Post Reflections aptly said it. A darkness in mind and soul is how some forgotten poet puts it. Its suddenness was so profound that we couldn't but react to it in any way.
Elemental to us, poets or writers, was how to grasp to some meaning in a symbol, a phrase, or word in the language of heart and tongue, and poets only candles.
Poets, surprisingly, by common consent, found themselves writing on a common subject. Reproductions of some of them are reprinted here. We aptly call them the protest poetry of the 80s. The theme of most during this time dealt with courage, shock, and grief over the tragedy inflicted upon a king. Sixth, fact check. The media of 1983. It was a year of ferment and change, of old problems made more oppressive by the new throbbing beats of the time. Said by Sheila S. Kernel, a Panorama staff stalwart, that reports during this time. For journalists, it is a year of libel charges, lawsuits, and sedition trials, which they bore as the harassment suits.
Jaja, Justice for Aquino, Justice for All movement called for a boycott of government-controlled newspapers in protest of media suppression. People picketed newspapers' offices with coffins to symbolize the death of press freedom.
In campuses, newspapers were set afire to protest with the lack of free expression. Our beloved journalists suffered physically and otherwise. Opposition tabloids flourished. They sold out papers with red news to the starved public. Hence, smart magazines like Tik Tik, Playboy Scenes, and Sakdal also played the sidewalks.
Radio, led by Radio Veritas, started reporting coverage of demonstration. Information Minister Gregorio Sendanya called the tabloid as the Mosquito Press and called their new political pornography.
However, there was a perceptible liberation of editorial policies in the major newspaper. Fam, I know you are wondering why I look like this all of a sudden. Well, this is our 7th fact check. The children's books during this period. Among the well-loved writings which abounded during this period were those of the children's stories.
The Children's Communication Center, CCC, directed by poet and writer Virgilio S. Almario, already had built up an impressive collection of these kinds of books. The following are some of the books during this period. In 1982, Plays for Children by James B. Reuter, S.J., New Day Pub. 1983, Storytelling for Young Children. And 1983, Jose and Cardo by Peggy Cor Manuel.
Lit Fam, here is our number 8 fact check. Did you know that the People's Cry not only found its outlets in poetry, but also in our prose fables, which transparently satirize the occupants of Malacanang?
Among those that saw prints were The Crown Jewels of Hearts by Sylvia Mendez Ventura, The Emperor's New Underwear by Reynardo A. Macaraig, The King's Cold by Babette Lolarga, The Case of the Missing Charisma by Sylvia L. Mayuga.
In all the fables, the king differently referred to as the Tutus Marcus or the king, the Haring Matinik, was meant to poke fun under ruler of the Malacanang. Similarly, Reina Maganda or the Queen was a veiled trust at his queen. They were both drunk with power and will be punished in the end of their misdeeds. Funny to say, but it is indeed true. Goodbye for now, kings and queens. And now, Lit Fam, it's time for our ninth fact check. One more to go. We are going to talk about the Philippine literature state in English during this time. Isagani Cruz, writing about the Philippine literature in the age of Ninoy, got the following observations. First, there is a change in direction of greater consciousness on context and form. Second, there is a change in number of writers and readers and the class of writers. Third, the resurgence of Balagtasism and the continued dominance of modernism. Fourth, the birth of the new poetic movement is still dim in outline. And lastly, the emerging of oral and written literature. And for our last fact check, we have some of our prominent writers during this period you might know.
In 1981, Philippine folk literature by Damiana Eugenio, Adventure of Marian by Carissa Orosa Uy, 1982, Somewhere Between Your Smile and Your Frown and Other Poems by Mila R. Garcia, 1983, Pares Pares by Bienvenido M. Noriega Jr. and Agon, Poems by Edgar B. Maranan, 1984, The Farmer by Alfredo Navarro Salanga, The Road to Moab and Other Stories by Leoncio P. Derriada.
Lit Fam, before we end this video, we can proudly say that Philippine literature, in spite of many restrictions, could still hold its luster.